think with the number of electronic devices I wrestle with, I feel like I should be on Wall Street. Sell, no, buy. I told you to sell.
How many screens do you have that you work at one time, Lincoln?
I only have one computer screen, but I've got two cell phones, and so it's just ridiculous, really. And I always turn off the ringer on the cell phones, and then I forget to turn it back on. And then I look at it later on. I'm like, oh, look, I got 5 calls from. It's hopeless, really.
I work with some people who have 2 and even 3 screens, and when you're on a Zoom or Teams call, they're constantly doing this because they're looking at their various screens.
Yikes. Well, Krista, you almost managed to match the wall.
They're actually quite different colors, but they look the same.
Krista, I love that color. I want to paint my wall that color.
This color, yeah. It's kind of a, I don't know what you call it. It's like a rusty red.
Send me the name if you still have it.
Oh, it's labeled in the shop.
In the what?
I said, I got a little can labeled in the shop.
Yeah, good. Tell me what it is. I love it.
I will, yeah.
We painted the kitchen in our cabin a color a little lighter than that many, many, many years ago, and a friend of ours referred to it as salmon's breath.
Oh, I don't know.
I know.
I don't think I want that color, John.
Well, I actually have this color in my kitchen too.
Oh,
It shows up twice.
it's nice. So we're waiting for Miles. Let's see. Okay, well, we'll wait for Krista to come back and then we'll get it started.
I'm right here. I was just
Okay.
I'm just printing off that poll list summary so I can refresh my memory on all our public input from 2 years ago.
We talked about that at a previous retreat.
Hey, Brian, did you get my email?
No, Lincoln.
All right.
Something's happening. Something's messed up.
It's weird because I had Aaron Rock send that accomplishments memo, but you got the other retreat materials from him, right?
I did, and I got the thing with the various strategic plans and so on, but I didn't get an accomplishments memo.
All right.
So I almost forgot it was my job to call us back into session. So here we are, back into our retreat session. Are we recording successfully, Erin? For anybody?
Aaron, did you hear that? Or Sandy asked if we're recording it there.
Yes, we are recording.
Okay, thank you. All right, take it away, John.
Okay. So these next couple of topics are a follow-on conversation to the one we had earlier this morning, which is now that you've made a decision to proceed to do a strategic plan, yet to be fully defined, but comes out of this morning's conversation that you're going to go do that work. There are other possible activities and work products that when Sandy and Lincoln and I spoke, Lincoln posed a couple of thoughts about possible topics, and we wanted to have some conversation with you about two of these, but also ask a more open-ended question about what other activities in 2023 should you be considering, particularly in light of a renewal initiative as a possibility in 2024. So strategic plan will be one significant activity in 2023. And Lincoln asked the question, which certainly came up this morning, about whether or not you should also be looking at an alternatives analysis. And this Brian, earlier is where I said, let's separate the question of whether alternatives analysis should be part of a strategic plan versus an analysis that board and staff would discuss next year, not necessarily to include in a plan. And so the first question is whether or not the land bank should do an analysis next year of what the world looks like if the renewal was not successful. That's the threshold question. Several of you have weighed in on that, but we should come to some consensus about what you want to do, whether you want to do that. And then Lincoln posed some questions, and Lincoln, you may have others, but if you're going to do that analysis, he wanted you to talk a little bit about what the parameters of that analysis should be. So should that analysis consider the potential of selling properties? Should it consider the potential to close properties to public access? So there may be other important questions to set the parameters, but let's start with the first question as a threshold, whether or not that analysis should be done next year, 2023. See, is that oh, Jim? Thanks for waving your arm, Jim.
In some side conversation here, talking to David and thinking about this a little bit further, it's perhaps best to think about Plan B. Alternatives should we not get renewed, and maybe push that down the road to, let's say we don't get renewed in 2024, we would likely put it on the ballot again in 2025. And if we get knocked down a second time, then we go into heavy strategic planning for sunset. In terms of planning for that possibility beforehand, I think we've already done some. We have a pretty good understanding financially of where we would be and what that would entail. Lincoln and I and Mike Pickett and then in the past, others have discussed this. And I think we have a pretty good idea of how we would proceed. So I guess I'm going to back off a little bit on the importance of that planning for should we not get renewed, and let's focus on outreach and public input to not only address our future, but and address our future as if we were renewed, but also just creating a plan for the plan, a structure, so that we can then incorporate public input into a longer-term strategic plan. So hopefully that provides a little bit clarity from me in terms of this responsibility to plan for not getting renewed. I think we always need to be talking about that. I don't think we need to necessarily do a whole lot of planning at this point. We just need to keep it in the back of our minds. We need to hope that it doesn't happen. and to move forward with the positive outlook that we get renewed, and we've got 12, 13, 14 more years to do the good work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the one thing I just want to clarify, I understood you to say, don't focus on this activity until after the 2024 vote. And then were you saying, then we sort of revisit the question whether we want to do it after the 2024 vote, and if so, when, but not to do it now. I'm getting that piece of it.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Let's see, Krista, Miles, and Brian.
Yeah, that was going to be my suggestion, was not to spend 23 looking at that scenario and focus more on the strategic plan. I thought I heard Jim say we should wait until it fails twice and then look at plan B, but I would say not to do that. Maybe I misunderstood him, but I would say if it fails in 24, we should go out for another request in 25, but we should also be planning for plan B in 25. I wouldn't wait for 2 failures of the ballot to look at that.
I agree with Krista. This is Jim.
Okay, thank you. Miles, Brian, and Lincoln.
Yeah, so that all sounds good to me. I think I'm curious, what are the actual consequences of the REIT not being renewed? Are we just talking about the vote would be for the funding? Does that mean that the land bank would be dissolved, or that it would still continue to be an agency as part of the government, but we would just have to find funding from other sources? Like, what does this mean for the organization if REIT's not renewed? And I guess that's a question for Lincoln. Maybe it's an obvious answer out there that everybody already knows. But then if it changes the structure, if that's to answer John's question about what the parameters should be, is changing the structure of the organization an option for us so that we become something completely different than what we are now, but still continue with the mission?
Lincoln, you want to respond to
Sure.
that?
So yeah, Miles, it is all about the funding, basically. So without that REIT funding, what we've got is whatever we have in the bank, essentially. So what's ever in the stewardship endowment or left over in our other accounts becomes the major source of revenue for the organization. And so what that means is we're going to be spending out of that pot of money. There's no way for us to have enough money to continue to run the organization as it is off of interest. It's just not possible. And our investment limitations also don't provide for that, basically. So we'd be spending it down. We'd also be scaling way back if people voted no. What they're saying for the most part is they don't want to see any more acquisitions. So we'd be kind of pulling back from that side. And the reality, though, is that we've been subsidizing stewardship activity out of those REIT funds heavily. So we would have to scale back all around. So you'd be looking at a very different organization with a lot fewer people going forward.
Does that help, Miles? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It seems like the REIT and the land bank are tied together in RCW statutes. So it seems like if you lose one, are you effectively losing? If you lose the REIT, does that mean you're losing what you're saying that the land bank would continue on, just would have to have alternative sources of funding?
Well, it would continue on with much less money and basically edging toward running out of money in some period of time, even at reduced levels. So the other big question in an alternatives analysis, I mean, I don't think it's about what we would do staffing wise. It's more about what we would do to save money, particularly on the stewardship side, are there properties that we would look at selling because they're just too expensive to maintain, or properties that we would close public access to so that we don't have to deal with public access on properties? Those kinds of questions.
Okay, so this is helpful to give people a sense of what an alternative analysis would include, but the question on the table that several of you have commented on is, should you be doing that analysis in 2023? And so far, everyone who has weighed in on that question say not in 2023, but after a vote in 2024, if it's not successful. Brian, and then Lincoln, you had your hand raised from earlier.
Yeah, I agree with Jim, and I guess with the consensus that we ought to defer that until after the election and cross that bridge if and when we come to it. But I would like to propose for consideration and discussion anyway, just an idea, which is that one of the things that we might be looking at is some kind of a gradual transition in expenditure of funds from property acquisition to property stewardship. I don't know whether this is the right time to do that, but it may help us as well as the public to answer some long-term financial questions.
So that sounds to me like a really good strategic planning conversation. Lincoln, I don't know what your concept of this strategic plan is after today's discussion, but sort of whether you want to shift your use of resources seems like it would be one of those, what are we going to do and how are we going to do it questions that the commission said they want to create before going to renewal.
And I think the commission's already begun that process. I mean, if you look at our budget over the last few years, what you'll see is pretty significant increase in stewardship expenditures. And if you go back further, it's very dramatic. So it's quite clear that the commission has been shifting resources toward stewardship as it stands right now. But yeah, I think that's important to call out in a plan, because if you're not following what the land bank does, no one will know that. What I was going to add about the alternatives analysis was basically that I don't see the need to actually do an analysis this coming year. I would like to pose the question, though, if there's going to be some kind of survey of the public at some point, are those kinds of questions ones you would want to ask? In other words, would you be okay with the land bank selling X, or whatever the question is? And I'm throwing that out there because I think, Brian, it was you who made the comment that the alternatives analysis could be perceived as a threat.
Yep.
So I just thought I would pose that because it's logical to ask those kinds of questions in the context of a survey where you're really trying to figure out what messages might appeal to people or turn people off. So I'm just throwing that on the table.
Just in response, Lincoln, I personally think that that's the kind of thing that we don't want to be perceived as even considering. I mean, this is a public trust. We've acquired those properties under a public trust, and I don't think we even want to give anybody the impression that we would consider that. And And I think it wouldn't be perceived as a threat.
Let's see, Aaron, but I don't know if that's Jim or David, and then Mike, Krista, Sandy.
I wanted to add a caveat to my statement earlier about putting this Plan B or alternative analysis off, and that is that in the process of the renewal campaign, questions will come from the public about what will happen if the vote doesn't go through, and so we need to prepare for that, and we need to prepare for for dealing with the other elephant in the room, which is the 0.5% REIT for affordable housing that will also go away should we go away. And that's a sticky wicket, but we need to be prepared.
So,
Sorry, this is Mike. Sorry, John. I didn't want to
go
lose
ahead,
this
Mike.
thought.
Yeah.
I lost you all and came back in. And Jim, I don't know that I know about the 0.5% affordable housing REIT and why it's tied to us. Can you explain that? Yeah, Lincoln, let me know.
Lincoln's probably better for that.
Great.
Yeah. So the land bank and the affordable housing REIT are both have state enabling legislation. The land bank came first. The affordable housing 0.5% REIT came after that, and I think it was 92 or 3, a couple of years after it. And there's a requirement in the affordable housing legislation that you have to have a fully funded land bank to be eligible to collect that 0.5% REIT.
So if our REIT goes down, that puts the affordable housing REIT at risk.
They're out of business.
Just automatically.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I just want to make a distinction between the question that's on the table and what Jim just said. It struck me that what Jim just described is related to Mike Thomas's comment about FAQs. You need to be prepared, I think Jim is suggesting, for questions about, well, what would happen if the initiative, the renewal didn't occur? Be prepared to answer that question is different than doing the type of analysis that Lincoln was suggesting. So I'm sort of splitting apart being prepared to answer a question versus doing a detailed analysis of what it would look like. Krista, Sandy, David, Brian, Mike.
So a couple things, what Lincoln said about including, what properties do people want to keep the longest in any type of public engagement? I would say not to do that now. I would agree with Brian. I think that's a bad, almost a kiss of death, or at least it's way open for misinterpretation by the public, and all of a sudden they'd be talking about us selling properties, and that's not a good idea at that point. And I guess I would use in terms of looking at alternatives, if it doesn't pass in 24, then the second run at the vote would include, I think, some conversation and campaigning to include information on affordable housing being at risk and Plan B if it's not renewed. I would bring those two topics up if we failed the first time, and we need to really get people's attention on why it's so important. And then just lastly, I think a general statement about what is your Plan B is, we can come up with a general statement that we would have to do an analysis, we would have to focus on stewardship, but we don't have to have the details and all the answers. We can have a 3-minute comment that'll tell people that we'll engage in some work if we fail. So that's it.
were those questions that were asked 5 years ago when this was up for vote? People ask us what happens if this goes down, or how do we address it then?
Yeah, that question did come up. It wasn't really addressed, frankly. I don't think that the commission at that time was comfortable with the idea that they would look to do anything with land bank properties other than what had been done. But the organization was quite different at that point in time, too. So there are a lot of obligations that we've taken on since then. Which do cost a lot of money, and it's perfectly legitimate to consider how you would reduce your expenditures.
Yeah. Okay, I'll wait for the turn.
Sorry for dropping off again. I'm not touching a thing. I'm just getting dropped. Sandy, David, Brian, Mike.
I'll just be very quick because basically I agree with what's been said. Include just on a basic FAQs, a very simple explanation of what the next steps would be, and also not to bring this up in a survey that helps us with strategic planning.
Thanks. David?
So the question is about an alternatives analysis, and kind of what I'm hearing is people talking about what happens if the voters reject the renewal. But what I'm wondering is, shouldn't the commission be trying to craft a long-term plan that, and I know we've talked about strategic planning and people are saying, you know, various things about what to do in the short term, but there needs to be some serious thought given to what the real long-term picture is here. Can acquisitions go on forever? Does there need to be a transition at some point to more of a stewardship model? When is that? We've never talked about that in a meaningful way. It's always just kind of kicked down the road. And maybe that's okay. Maybe another 12 years operating the way that we are now is what needs to happen. But I don't think anybody here could really explain our position on this question because we just haven't taken one. We don't go there. And I feel like that's a mistake. It's going to be a mistake at some point. And it may be necessary going into the next renewal to explain, here's what we see happening in 12 years. Brian, your cat is entertaining us greatly. Over here, these guys are laughing while I'm talking. I don't know why, and then I realize it's the cat. I think it's the cat. Anyway, that's going to have to get talked about at some point.
Can I just chime in real quick?
Well,
to answer that question?
Hold on.
Okay.
I will come back to you, Jim, but I want to get everybody involved in the conversation here. Brian, Mike, and then Jim.
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with Jim's comment about the affordable housing REIT. We really need to emphasize how those two are tied together at the hip. And more, I think we want to be proactively supportive of the housing REIT. That is the biggest question in this county right now for folks. And I think the land bank is often perceived, however incorrectly, as being at odds with or detrimental to the opportunities for affordable housing. So I sent an email to Lincoln last week saying basically, I think we should be proactively supportive of that. And this is maybe something to consider in a strategic plan, is including opportunities for partnerships with housing groups, such as potentially came up and became, through misunderstandings, a conflict in the Glenwood acquisition.
Your cat's tail is very entertaining, Brian. Mike, and then Jim, and then I'm going to summarize, because I think we actually have quite a bit of consensus on this one, and move us to the next question. Mike, and then
Right,
Jim.
so I'll put a comma after Brian's comments, because I agree with them 100%, and add the fact that we should not be anything but positive about our expectations for the REIT. We might have in our back pocket ideas, but if you even look at our guiding law, it says that we should prioritize easements over fee purchases. And that's what we would do in the case of a downturn. And in fact, that's something we should be considering for our short-term goals going into this real estate market. Unless somebody convinces me I'm wrong, we budgeted $4 million. If we do the same run rate as we have in the last 5 months, we will beat that by $250,000, which is the smallest increment over our budget that I can remember since I've been looking at this stuff. So we have to consider how we change our acquisition versus easement strategy. And also that means we move more to stewardship in some ways. And what does that mean? I don't know. But we're already in the middle of having to consider a transition. That can be put into a document that says, when real estate sales lower, here's what we do. When real estate sales are high, here's what we do. And it basically answers the question of, what are you going to do now? It depends on real estate sales. What are you going to do when real estate sales come back up? More acquisition. When they go back down, more preservation. So I think that we've got enough there without having to have a plan B out in front of everybody. It says if we're worried, then maybe there's reason to be worried by the voter. And I think if we're confident that what we've been doing is positive, it's definitive, it's good for the community, it follows our mandate, then the voter will see it that way. And likely with lots of other PR stuff, we're gonna kill this election. So I think we should be nothing but positive. I think Brian said that. I'm 100% behind him on that.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Jim?
This is all really good, but I wanted to address David's comments that we don't really talk about what happens if we sunset. And I wanted to tell him that not only during my period on the commission over the last 14 years and a couple of stints as financial officer, as well as Doug Strandberg's stint as financial officer, and going forward with Mike, we've all talked about this with Lincoln, and the conversation's been ongoing for years about what happens when and if we sunset. So there has been discussion. It just hasn't been necessarily commission-wide. It's been amongst the financial people involved, and because it is pretty much a financial issue. It takes away the acquisition process, and it takes away the REIT. So it has been discussed on a very consistently and rather in depth with regards to the financial ramifications of a sunset.
I see that Lincoln and Krista have your hands up, but let me summarize, because so far everybody who's weighed in, there's been a really strong consensus. And then if you two want to continue to comment on this, great. But there seems to be quite clear consensus on this one, that you do not want to do this alternatives analysis or Plan B analysis in 2023. You may want to do it in 2024 if the renewal effort is not successful, or after the 2024 vote, I should say. You may want to do it at that point, but not before. That you need to be prepared, however, to answer questions about, well, what would happen if the renewal effort is not successful, through an FAQ, but different than doing sort of the detailed analysis that Lincoln's asking us about. And then the only other thing that I think there's, Brian, Mike, David's comments about what's the right balance here, stewardship, acquisition. Strikes me that is a strategic planning conversation. So that goes on the list of some heavyweight questions. If you're going to do this when you do this strategic plan next year, there needs to be some discussion about. Lincoln and Krista, still want to weigh in on this before we shift to the next question?
Yeah, I just had a point of clarification about the whole conservation easement acquisition question. First, we do consider, I want people to be clear on this, that we do consider conservation easements in every case, really. That's one of the first questions we ask is this appropriate as a conservation easement? And if it is, and if the landowner is wanting to go that route, we will go that route. But you don't get to pick. A lot of times the landowner is not interested. Sometimes they're interested and you cannot come to agreement with them. You're just never going to get to the place where you agree on what the limitations are going to be versus the money that you're providing. And I'll also just add that this perception that it's cheaper to purchase conservation easements is not necessarily true, at least at the acquisition stage, because we have a lot of opportunity to get matching funds or grants, partners on outright acquisition projects. For easements, our options are extremely limited. Generally, we're going to pay full freight on them.
Thanks, Lincoln. Krista? Oh, okay. So let's.
No, wait, I do have something to say.
Okay.
I wanted to agree with Lincoln on the cost of easement versus acquisition is not always so straightforward. And also, just for clarification for those on the call that don't attend all our meetings, I think we shouldn't leave the impression that we kind of are willy-nilly. Sometimes we acquire and sometimes we don't. And what we do on a regular basis, do a cash flow analysis that kind of projects out what the commitments are on any project. And we see where the tension is going to be created, or the not shortfall, but a reduction in revenues, I guess, or resources. So I think we do look at that at least a couple times a year in terms of how projects are progressing. So we can't predict everything, but we try to plug things in to see how they're going to affect the system. And my recollection is that the REIT number that we use in that projection is constant with a little bit of increase, and it's always been a pretty conservative number. So it might get more conservative now, but it's always, we've been careful about that. So I think we go into this with at least our eyes almost fully open.
Thanks, Krista. So let me shift to the next question. And this came up earlier in the discussion this morning, maybe with a little bit different take on it. But this notion on the agenda of assessing neighbors' experience with land bank properties. So Lincoln, feel free to chime in if I'm not describing this as you envision, but my understanding is that there are two circumstances. One you spoke about earlier, sort of controversial projects that generate a lot of heat. And the point that Jim was making earlier is, with the benefit of some history and hindsight, an awful lot of those issues which were raised at the time don't come to fruition, that the concerns just don't pan out. The second issue is that there are some adjacent property owners who are an awful lot louder than the others, and that the vast majority of those who are adjacent property owners are not at all dissatisfied and in fact quite pleased with your work. And so I think the question that Lincoln was posing here is, should you undertake an effort to reach out to more of your adjacent property owners to understand their experience in being physically located next to land bank properties or easements? And if you were to do that, how do you think you should do that? And I guess also maybe a question about when to do that. Lincoln, did I characterize that correctly?
Yeah, that's characterizes it well. I think I would ask though that Doug chime in on this one, since we had a conversation about this during the break.
Okay. Well, who wants to get us started? Mike.
These areas. Wait a minute. Let's get Doug. I just wanted Doug to weigh in for a second.
Okay. Okay.
Boy, thanks, Lincoln. I'm a little bit flummoxed to where to start, but I guess just, yeah, I really agree that this sort of assessment and thing is important, and really getting neighbors out there and vocal, it would be fantastic. We have such tremendous relationships with so many of our neighbors, neutral ones with others, and really that's very few negative ones. I provided Lincoln with some examples of this last week, where we ran out of propane for doing our burns, and the neighbor volunteered his propane tank to us, and so we didn't have to go run all the way down to town, fill the tank, and come back up. It kept us working with a crew of 4 people. That's just phenomenal. And he showed up to thank us at the end of the day. Those sorts of things that happen all the time. So is that kind of what you wanted me to weigh in on, Lincoln, or is there something more from our conversation?
Yep.
Hey, but Doug, if I could put you on the spot further, you're out on the front lines having the kind of experience you just described, as are your colleagues. I know you're not the only one. But if the land bank were to try and do some of this work, how do you think, what would be an effective way to do it? Without being too intrusive, but to try and gather a lot more opinions about how adjacent property owners feel about the land bank as a neighbor.
Well, I think you're kind of looking at trying to do an assessment, and we're human, we're a small organization. There's always going to be room for improvement, but I think there's a really big difference about improvement than just tearing down, and people who just kind of want to find fault in everything. So I think that assessment and or looking for ideas from neighbors in terms of what they want us to do communications wise, or how they think things are going on the property, that's all valuable. We're doing that informally, all the time. But it would be probably a useful tool to have that, and then potentially, for the people from the public who might run a campaign, maybe there would be some testimonials basically that are available from that sort of an effort.
Thanks. Mike?
I don't think I have my hand up.
Oh,
maybe I did. I just speak. I mean, I agree. I mean, this is like asking your customers what they think. And I think it's obvious that we should be doing this along the way, a year after the acquisition or the easement, 2 years after that, et cetera, and just as a normal course of duty. It shouldn't take that long. We've got people out in the field anyway doing work. So anyway, yeah, I agree.
Brian, Krista, Sandy.
I think that's a valuable discussion, But rather than make it part of a strategic plan, what I'd like to suggest is that Doug and Peter and Amanda maybe lead a commission discussion at one of our future meetings about what works or what's been problematic. And I think generally most things have worked with most people. I mean, I've got to tell you, I've been knocked out by the public relations work that Peter has done on the North Shore in the face of potential real opposition to that project, and everybody seems to love it. So what's the secret, you know, and what are we doing that we should keep doing?
Krista?
Yeah, I think it would be a great idea if stewards were willing to take it on, because I think it is just good customer service. It would provide us some feedback if we're not really hitting the mark, and it allows them a chance to converse, and we can get some stuff written down that we know we might have to look at. And it also provides a document of support, which could, as going into this renewal, those statements would be very helpful to be able to use publicly if we were given permission. So I think and I don't think it has to be done every year. I think, as Brian suggested, or someone a year after acquisition, or Mike, I think maybe, and then periodically a check-in. But I think it is just part of public outreach. I think it'd be great to do.
So Krista, when you say it would be great if the stewards would take it on, what's the it? What's your
connecting with the neighbors and getting their feedback, adjacent neighbors, and so making that. I'm assuming it would be the stewards that would implement that. Maybe I'm off the mark on that, but it seems like it could happen at year end when they're reviewing conservation easements or looking at preserves or whatnot. Am I not correct in thinking it would go to stewards to do? Or
what,
Lincoln?
But before Sandy, I know you have your hand up, but Lincoln, you want to just respond to Krista's question?
Well, so I guess my feeling about this, I think that our stewards do an awful lot of neighbor outreach now. That's just happens all the time. My concern is that, you know, I think about this kind of reminds me of the climate change debate, where news organizations love to present both sides of an argument. And so there are like 50,000 scientists who agree that climate change is happening, that humans cause it, and then there are 3. And the news story is, oh, here's one of the 50,000, and here's one of the 3. I think it's really important that we are able to show that the overwhelming majority of people who live next to land bank preserves are really happy to have us as a neighbor. Rather than just having anecdotal evidence.
And Lincoln, how do you think you gather that information?
I think it has to be more of a formal survey, honestly.
Are we thinking through the stewards doing that? I'm not trying to give it to the stewards. Or would it come from the office that we mail out a survey periodically? It can happen.
Yeah,
in office.
I think it needs to be done centrally. How we do it is another question. You know, we'll have to, if it's going to be done, we need to make sure we actually get responses. So that's the case of it.
Sandy?
So, of course, it could be the new homeowners, the new property owner bands. It would be something like that, possibly.
I didn't catch
the packet that goes out. The packet that goes out from Tanya to new property owners. It would be something like that Tanya would send out.
Yeah,
a packet to these neighbors periodically.
Yeah, we'd have to figure out the right mechanism.
I've heard Lincoln say that. I'm sorry, I was just going to say one real quick comment. I've heard Lincoln say that we have over 300 neighbors to our preserves, but our staff spends an inordinate amount of time with about 2 or 3. That's 1%.
Sandy, then Peter.
I was just going to circle back to Jim's earlier comment about learning lessons from
Mhm.
the different controversies, and a lot of those have been with neighbors, even if they are just the little 3%. And that in revisiting the lessons that, and some of those didn't pan out, the concerns then eventually evaporated, that those particular owners, neighbors would be good to connect with and see how do you feel. Now, this wouldn't be a written survey, this would be a personal thing. How do you feel now? You had previously given concerns about this. What's your new perception? And what, if anything, could we do differently in when this type of scenario comes up with neighbors? I was just thinking that a personal reach out to those who initially had issues with us might be good. That's all.
Thanks, Andy. Peter.
Yeah, I'm kind of divided on this. I think neighbor relations are right at the top of my list. I put a fair amount of energy into it. And I think, if asked, I could probably next week get a dozen supportive comments from neighbors. If I just reached out to them, if we wanted something like that, that could be posted somewhere. Putting out a survey, I think could work, but I think we would also then, making it more, not quite anonymous, but making it less personal. I think we'd get a lot of, well, I wish the land bank would thin that forest next to my property, which, is something we're working towards, but it's like a 20-year goal. And so I guess I would just be cautious about the kinds of questions I would ask in a real survey. And I mean, obviously we would be cautious, but I think kind of just depends on what the goal is. If we're looking for some signs of support, I think that's easy to get in writing in the near term, if we want to go that route.
Peter, just I'm putting two ideas together here. Brian's earlier suggestion that it would be helpful to have the stewards come and speak to the commissioners at a future meeting about what's working, maybe what doesn't work so well. And then the second idea that could be a part of that conversation is the lessons learned, looking back on a couple of projects that were controversial, had a fair amount of heat associated with them, and what did we learn from that? If you heard that suggestion, Peter, it sounds like that's something that you think that would be pretty easy for this, not so much the lessons learned, maybe some of that, but what's working, what are our practices now, what are you hearing from neighbors? That something sounds like you could do pretty easily.
Well, I'd be happy to come talk with the commission about it and give my thoughts. I mean, I don't think it's rocket science. I think when people have a beef, it's either something that's resolvable or not, and if they feel heard, sometimes that ends it, even if it's not resolvable. And sometimes, I don't know, sometimes things just go south, but I'm happy to talk about it. And I don't know.
Okay, thanks. Sandy, I'm glad you came back to that lessons learned suggestion, because Jim made that earlier today, and there was a fair amount of interest in that idea from other commissioners at the time. Lincoln, I don't think you commented in that earlier conversation about sort of your thoughts about bringing forward sort of some retrospective looks about what we learned with some of the controversial projects. Does that seem like a useful conversation and easy to pull together?
Yeah, I thought that was part of my vacation activity. No, I think that's a good idea. I'm happy to do it. I think David is right. I don't really want to be the only source of institutional memory in the organization. So we do have a couple of staff who have been here longer than me. So just, I will point that out, but I'm happy to write some of this down. I think that's a good idea.
Okay. Any other comments about this assessing neighbors' experience question? Okay, so this sounds like there is interest in carving out some time. Krista, sounds like this would fall to your agenda planning skills, carving out some time at a future meeting to have a kind of a combo conversation about what the stewards are experiencing, what they're seeing as best practices in terms of their daily ongoing relationship with neighbors, and taking a look back at a few of the controversial projects and figuring out what we can learn. And then not everybody commented on this, but then the other idea here that there was some support for was doing a survey of your, what did you say, Mike? Your customers, but your neighbors. And Peter's caution about being careful about how that's worded, but a survey that would come from the central office, and then Sandy's point that there, even with a survey, there may be some owners that you would want to give a personal touch to, but that's a sort of case-by-case assessment. Does that sound like the right game plan? Okay, David?
Yes, I'm wondering what happens if you survey a bunch of people and you find that there's a bunch of issues that people want to raise. You know, some of them may be kind of small, medium sized stuff. Then what? I mean, it seems like implicit that you got to go take care of it. So it could turn into a major work generating thing. I don't know.
Lincoln?
Well, I think that's critical for us to know. If that's what comes back, then yeah, we do need to take care of it. Some of it may not be fair. Peter's example of, I wish the land bank would thin their forest. Well, we can have a difference of opinion in how properties ought to be managed, but if there are obvious issues that come up that we could do something that really will change that relationship, then we want to know about it, and want to try and address it.
And I would also just underscore what Peter said. Just some people may need an action or a response. Other people may be satisfied with a conversation. Thanks for hearing me. Thanks for listening to my perspective. I appreciate your perspective. I mean, so not every single survey response would require the same kind of action. It'll vary. Krista.
Yeah, I just want to, I get the sense, and I understand sometimes it's hard to ask for people's input on what you're doing. And I get a sense that there's a fear of what the answer might be, but I think that is kind of the risk. That's what we need to do. I just have to support what Lincoln said. I think I'm confident that most of the answers we would get would be positive, and the rest, we just can't be afraid of what we're going to hear and not ask the question. Whatever. I just keep your friends close and keep your enemies closer. If you don't know what they don't like, you can't do anything about it. So that's all. I support Lincoln.
Okay. So far today, you've decided that you're going to tackle a strategic plan in 2023. You're going to do the work that we just talked about and summarized with respect to assessing neighbors' experience. You're not going to do an alternatives analysis. And so the last question for you to think through, is there, aside from these two issues of alternatives analysis and neighbors' experience, is there other work leading up to a renewal vote that you think should be addressed in 2023 that we haven't already talked about? Does anybody have the brain power left to think that through today?
I can't get my.
Yeah, Peter and then Sandy and then Jim. Peter, Sandy, Jim.
Okay, just getting my mic back on. So I'm kind of reluctant to mention this one, but I think it does seem somewhat relevant to me. So at the bottom of past commission meeting agendas, there's been a placeholder for a discussion about land bank staffing, and I think that's popped up a few times. And sort of related to Brian's comment about preparing for the increasing cost of stewardship, I think voters would probably benefit from seeing some sort of very brief land bank staffing plan. It seems like our workload is ever increasing, and that's probably due mostly to increasing preserve use by both locals and visitors, and then also just the need for more active management as habitats can decline. So I think whether or not the land bank staff grows or stays the same, and maybe works with more contractors, I think it's important to attract and keep talented people in this very expensive place. And so along those lines, I think land bank titles and salaries are more like those of a small nonprofit from around 1990 than many agencies around us. And I think they're due for an update. Doesn't have to be anything dramatic, but I'd like to propose some sort of title, salary, staffing structure review, and just so we can be sure that we've thought through how many people we need and that the salaries are competitive and there's room for internal advancement. I think that's been an issue in the past at the land bank, kind of no place to go at some point. So I liked how the Stowe Land Trust included one of their goals was something like promoting a strong organization through effective people and systems or something like that. So it seems like being able to look forward and projecting what our staff is going to look like a few years out will be helpful, particularly to those people who've commented in the past that the land bank is bloated or has too many people, which I don't think is the case at all. But I think some data would help.
Thanks, Peter.
Looks like we lost John again. We'll be back on shortly. Welcome back. We can't hear you though.
Now?
Barely.
Keep speaking.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. This was the problem we had the other day, Aaron. Now it's okay. All right. Apologies. Sandy and then Jim.
Have 2 points. One, as far as other activities, when we work on preparing a survey for neighboring landowners, I was going to suggest that we do a slightly different survey to our conservation easement.
Slightly different survey for
It would have
easement neighbors.
Yes, well, easements that we hold easements over their property. So we do annual maintenance. And so we might consider also seeking their opinions as well. Again, just to iterate, Lincoln, this is basically, even though we're not working directly towards campaigning, in order to close a sale, you have to ferret out the objections and get them answered. So I think it's critical that we try to root out those and see if we can't, if someone has a big beef or a little beef, if we can't resolve it and convert them to be a supporter. So there's that. And then secondly, I also, along the lines of what Peter just said, I had already had on my note here to mention a staffing review component as part of a strategic plan, which has been on our agenda. We didn't talk about what all the elements that should be in a plan, but that's one I wanted to mention. I agree.
Thank you, Sandy. Jim?
Yeah, I agree about the stewardship staffing being a significant part of the any planning process. But what I really wanted to address was what Peter mentioned, which was the increasing costs of stewardship. I think we need to do a little public information campaign on that as well. I mean, what I've seen as a private land steward for my clients is the doubling of expenses over the last few years. Even I just got a proposal from Carson for doing forestry, thinning and fuel supply management for almost $40,000 for 3 acres. And that sort of blew my mind. It used to be maybe a couple $1,000s per acre when I first started doing this 17 years ago on client land. And this is not a minor issue. This is huge as it relates to our budget and our income. And I'm not so sure there are people out there that understand that.
Thanks. Thank you, Jim. Sandy, do you have your hand up again, or just didn't? Okay. A question for, Mike, yes, sorry.
There we go. Okay, sorry, John. I can't tell if my hand's up or not the way my screen shows my picture.
Yeah, no worries.
So anyway, I think the employee side of this is just fundamental business. And it's something that Lincoln should be doing on a regular basis and should be reporting to us on competition, competitiveness, open slots, problems, etc. And I think that would be something we, especially in stewardship, because stewardship, at least for the next couple of years, as I see it, I'm a little bold, but it's going to be really critical to us. I mean, this is where a lot of our energy and efforts are going to be spent. So I encourage that. I'm glad that we have the kind of culture where somebody's willing to speak up and say those kinds of things. I think that's great. So that was really my only comment. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. I have a question kind of for Sandy and Krista, I guess. Here are a couple of ideas that have been suggested, and I'm not clear on when and how the commission goes about setting its own work plan for the year. So when is the point at which you would decide that some of these ideas in one fashion or another you'd want to build into your sequence of meetings, your work plan for the year? Because some of these maybe should be considered in the context of that conversation, and I just don't know when and how that happens. Sandy? Oh, you're on mute.
My feeling is that at least somewhat until now, we've been mostly meeting to meeting as far as setting agenda, but always keeping in mind what some other bigger topics were that we needed to get to. But I think that going through the process of this strategic plan, if Lincoln brings to us in January a basic outline, that will, in a sense, help set the direction of all of the various points that we need to be focused on and discussing as we work through the plan. So that might be helpful.
I think our agendas always make it tricky to put in an additional topic. And we sometimes, in the past, we have said we will have extended meetings to help address something that's out of the, the boilerplate agenda outline. I think my past experience and most recent, with the school and now with the hospital district, going after a strategic plan, it might be unpopular, but I foresee us needing additional meetings during the month, maybe at least one for an hour and a half or two that is devoted to strategic planning to keep that process moving forward. So that would be for the period of this coming year. I'm not saying every month, but it just seems like that might be a necessity. And so I guess if we're looking at these other items, I think what we'd have to do is really agree and solidify some extended meetings where the specific topic is added, staffing review or cost of stewardship, whatever it is. But it's going to have to be deliberate and kind of planned ahead, I think. Even putting those topics out, Lincoln and I can sit down and look at every quarter and decide which meeting and which topic is going to, represent an extended meeting. So I think we should do it ahead of time, because otherwise we always get to the end of the meeting, we look at future agenda items, but we just confirm that we have them. It's hard to get at them unless you block people's time out.
Because that's where I was headed, Krista, is if you want to tackle these other ideas, as you just summarized them, the staffing plan, the cost of stewardship, if you want to hear reports on those things, to build them into future agendas seems like the right approach here, but I just wasn't sure how and when you do that.
So I guess my question to Lincoln would be, can we, you and I kind of look at the year in January, not over Christmas, I know you're busy doing, but can we maybe look at January and look and see how we could kind of outline and get those on, so especially if staff are going to report, then they know ahead of time when it's coming.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. I think we're ready to move on to the next part of the agenda, where we thought it would be helpful, interesting, and respectful, all of the above, to ask the outgoing commissioners to talk a little bit about their experience. Biggest value that the land bank provides to the island communities. What have you learned about the land bank that you didn't know before you started? What advice would you have for incoming commissioners? If you wanted to throw in a bonus question, what was your favorite experience with the land bank? But between Miles and Jim and David, one of you can draw straws. And Miles, I'm looking at you in the middle of my Hollywood square, so I'm gonna call on you first here.
Okay, I'll go. Well, I'll put in context and say that this is overall the 4-year term that I've had has been a really good experience to be part of an organization that does the work that the land bank does, with the cooperation between the commissioners, the productivity of the meetings, the dedication of the staff. It's a solid organization. It was the first time that I've been a part of something like this, and I'm really proud to have participated. So thank you to everybody for that. I want to shout out for 3 people. I know this is not what you're asking, John, but since I have the floor, there's 3 people I want to shout out to. So Lincoln, I just want to say, in general, on behalf of probably a lot of people in the islands, just thanks for the work that you do. You probably don't get a lot of pats on the back or high fives, and it's a lot of, you do most of the, when we have these commissioner meetings, you really do most of the work, or a ton of work. So thank you so much for doing that and for keeping an even keel. I want to say thank you to Krista and Sandy too. Krista was the chair when I started, and both of you were really good models for leadership. Krista's, no nonsense, let's keep on track, and a good sense of humor to liven things up. And I really appreciate the way that your approach and your attitude towards the challenges. And Sandy, same thing, you came very well prepared. You do an excellent job with your homework. You really went above and beyond on some of these issues, and kept us really with the important things in focus. And I think that really helped us and everyone else go through some things with dignity. So thank you for that. I think the biggest value for me for the land bank is that it is a placeholder of special places. So even if nobody in this room or on the island sets foot on any of the preserves, just knowing that they're there and that they'll be there for a long time, to me is really valuable. And the intrinsic ecological value of those places is very special. So I'm just happy knowing that they're there. I'll pass on the mic.
Thank you, Miles. Yeah, your colleagues are applauding. In the room, David or Jim?
Yeah, I'm going to go. The biggest value the land bank provides to the island community is public land and habitat conservation. It's getting more and more important every day to do more and more of that. And I think it goes without saying, after all the discussion of the reauthorization, that the land bank ought to go in guns blazing and get another 12 years of doing it. That's what environmental organizations need to do now more than ever. And I certainly hope this one will do that. What have I learned about the land bank that I didn't know? One of the things that was interesting to me to learn is like how Lincoln has prioritized acquisitions and trying to create contiguous habitat and stuff that fits together. I remember one of the first things that happened to me as a commissioner is a friend of mine called and said, "Hey, would the land bank be interested in buying this little piece of land in town?" And I called Lincoln and I said, "Hey, so-and-so called and asked about this," and he gave me his explanation of like, that totally does not fit into what we're doing here. And I called my friend back and said, yeah, it's not happening. So that's been a really good thing to kind of observe and to see how it's succeeding now with some of the acquisitions that have happened, especially over here in San Juan. There's been some nice things that are really fitting together. Advice for incoming commission members. I think that the next commission is going to be just super important, and get ready to put in the time that it's going to take. I've always felt like the meetings, I guess I got to say, they're too short. We never get to enough of the stuff we need to get to. They need to be longer. There need to be more of them in this format where it's like a whole day facilitated thing. I've consistently felt that the retreats that we've done have been the most productive time that we've spent by a big margin. So, there it is.
Thank you, David. Jim, as the one with the longest tenure, you get the last word of outgoing commissioners.
Well, as you know, I all too often try to get the last word.
This was planned.
Yeah. Especially with you, John. You are relentless in trying to manage me. I think the biggest value of the land bank to this community is that it is a vital component to a healthy community. It's also a vital component to the health of our own souls. I think of authors like Edward Abbey or Wallace Stegner and the things that they've said about wild places and the importance that they hold for all of us. It's rare that people get to do the kind of work that is, in my mind, called legacy work. I think, it's been a total joy for me to have been part of this organization and this group of people, past, present, and hopefully future. A total joy. And I think that we're doing things that will impact people of this county into perpetuity. And as I said, that's a rare thing to be involved in. And that's what's driven my passion for this organization and the work that we've been able to do. What I've learned, I can't even possibly start to list the things that I've learned over the last 14 years. It's been a tremendous growth experience for me. It's helped me in my work as a private land steward and taking care of a significant amount of acreage for my clients. And I welcome the conversations I have with people about the land bank. Everybody I talk to, I say, well, what do you think about the land bank? And the joy that it brings this community, and especially the people that really do enjoy it and are vocal about using land bank property and being out there in the wilderness or at least in nature, no matter how close you are to a road or a car or a ship or something. But what we do is important work, and it's been a pleasure to be a part of it. And I get goosebumps thinking about it because the people I've served with, all of you people, all the commissioners that have come and gone, and not a whole lot of staff that have come and gone, thankfully. Lincoln's been here my whole time, and I appreciate all the work that you guys do, and I know that it's significant and time consuming, and it's good to have the support of a commission like this. And I think that new blood is always good. So you guys will always be on my mind. I'll be paying attention. I'll do what I can do to help. And advice for incoming commission members, I would say, be engaged, be passionate. And if either one of those things falls by the wayside, make room for somebody else. Because that's really what it takes, is engagement and passion for the work that we do. And thank you from the bottom of my heart.
And on that note.
Oh.
But kind of loud up here. Thank you. Yes. Miles, you should have come.
It's in the mail.
Okay. Thank you for your help. We tried to pick photographs that hopefully represent projects that you were involved in and maybe had some.
Nice.
Very nice. Nice, Tanya. That's great.
Nice. And Miles will get his at some point, I presume?
Yeah, Miles is right here. I don't know if you can see it.
Oh, good.
It's a tree.
Nice.
Thank you.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's just a small token, obviously.
That's great.
It's
Fantastic.
Yes, Mike.
John, I don't know when I'd written down a couple things that I wanted us not to forget as we leave. One is we're going to have to endorse, I think, or encourage some community group to get involved in our renewal. Do things we can't do, right, as a board. And I don't know how, you don't have to formally endorse them, et cetera, but at some point, I've had people come to me and say, what can I do? You know, I want to, you know, I'm worried, I want to get this thing going, you guys, I want to get it renewed. So that's one thing I think we should put as our to-do list.
Mike, Mike, I'm interrupting, I know.
Yeah, go ahead.
But just to sort of state the obvious, the commissions past have gone through this before more than once. So there is sort of when I know Lincoln can fill all of you in on this, but there is a method to the madness. There is a way in which that happens.
Okay,
so
great.
It's not new ground that needs to be created. I guess Lincoln is the way there is work to be done, but it's not something that hasn't been done before.
Okay, great. Thanks, John. I'll feel comfortable that it's going to happen on its own, however. I think the second thing is we're going to come out of here with some task, I think, John, right, like we did last time. And how do we, as a commission, do a better job of following up on those and holding ourselves accountable throughout the year than we did last year, which seemed like might not have happened as much. And then the third thing is, in this renewal thing, how do we continue to improve, or maybe we don't need to, our relationships with influencers like the county council, the Ag Guild, the EDC, the Port, Preservation Trust, tribes, the drone. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that really, because of what they do, like what we do. And they will influence others as we go forward. And I just don't want to forget them. And maybe we put together some kind of a program to engage them in our strategic, not the determination of our strategic plan, but the communication of these are our goals for next year. These are what we're going to do for the next 5 years. We want you to know about it. Okay. I just didn't want to forget those things.
Yeah, those are really good points and reminders, Brian, and then Sandy.
I had an, pardon me. I had an afterthought about something that I'd like to see included in our planning that we haven't mentioned. We've talked a lot about working more closely and better with the county, meaning mostly, I think, the county council. What we've left out is the planning element. The commission never even got a copy of the Ross plan to review, and we have not looked at all at the the long-term county comp plan process, which affects us and affects open space absolutely. We talked a couple of years ago about working more closely with the planning staff, or actually more accurately, getting them to work more closely and to be more responsive to us in telling us about changes that come across their desk. There's a new administration now. That never really happened as far as I can see. There's a new administration now, new planning director who seems to want to be very proactive. So I think we ought to renew that effort and make sure that we are included and work very closely with planning stuff, and that they inform us of anything that's happening that may affect the land bank and potential development, potential open space. And I'm talking specifically about the rezoning of some of the large acreage rural open space now. So I think we ought to take a look at that in our planning.
Thanks, Brian. Sandy?
I just wanted to make sure that we opened up for public comment as on our agenda. So I didn't know if that was coming back to me to do or if you've got it handled.
Either way is fine with me. I wanted the commissioners to have a chance to make their comments.
Okay.
Let me just circle back to something Mike sort of asked a question about, and then we'll see what public comments anyone may have. Mike, you asked about follow-up to the retreat. And I can give you a partial answer, which is typically what I do with Tanya's help, who takes notes, and I take notes, and we sort of do a melding, is try and highlight the action steps from each of the topics. And I'll summarize those verbally again here at the end. I've summarized them before, but you have several that you decided today, and one really big one. And I will give you that, but how you decide that you want to build that into your conversations through the course of the year is sort of up to you. Do you want to check in on a regular basis on the to-do list that came out of today? Do you want to wait till the end of the year and see how you did? I mean, that's part of your process of thinking through how you want to follow up on these things. I'm not trying to kick the can here, but it really is a decision, I think, more for you than me. I'll give you a summary, and then what you want to do with it, I think you need to figure out.
Yeah, that's fair enough. And Krista, looking forward to your leadership. And Sandy, you've been awesome. I can't even believe it. Just incredibly awesome the last 6 months. But I just think this is something that the commission ought to address as you create agendas and things for us in the next 3 or 4 months, that we kind of like, where are we on this? Instead of, because it just seemed to me we had opportunities in the past and got so busy doing other things. I'm not sure we even knew we weren't doing the things we said we were going to do. So, somehow the meetings could be managed to cover some of that stuff. Be awesome. And John, you've done a great job. I appreciate you.
Thanks, Mike. So do we have anyone who would like to comment on the proceedings of the afternoon? Any members of the public? David.
David, yeah, hi. Well, what a productive day it seems to have been. You've defined some very important things for the future. Just this last topic, it strikes me, you certainly can't wait a year and see how you did on these things. You're going to generate a list of important work that needs to be done with probably standing check-ins, either at your monthly meeting or some mechanism to make sure these things happen. It's a critical time. But I've enjoyed listening in and seeing about the work that you guys are planning to do.
Thanks, Marilyn.
I just want to thank you for letting us sit in. I've learned 100 times more than I ever knew about the land bank. And of course, I think I know a lot about the land bank, so that was really useful. And I just want to say, I so appreciate the 3 outgoing commissioners, the work that they've done, and also what they've said about the work that they've done. And I wish that our public could hear those kinds of comments as well, because that's the kind of thing that starts to generate passion and knowledge about this organization, is knowing, what these folks have said upon ending their tenure. So thank you very much.
Any other public comments? Thank you, Marilyn.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Erin. I'm the communications coordinator for San Juan County, and I've just, sorry, and this is Buster, my dog. And I've been listening in all day, and it's just been so interesting. I've learned so much about the land bank and how you all work, and I'm excited to help lend support in any way I can over these next couple years, and to help make sure that your communication efforts are amplified through whatever means I can help with. That's all. Thanks.
Great.
Thanks, Erin. Lincoln?
Yeah, I'm just glad that Erin popped up there, because I was going to suggest that maybe we hear from some of the staff who we haven't heard anything from today.
Yeah. Any staff members like to offer comments or
about Aaron?
observation?
How about Aaron with an A?
Aaron does have a bit of news.
I do.
Maybe he hasn't checked his email.
No,
Yeah.
he sent me the email.
Oh, about REIT. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, we are very close now to hitting 5 million for the year. We just had a $100,000 REIT revenue day just yesterday.
Oh, great.
Big way to start closing out the end of the year here. So I'm assuming that's the news Lincoln was mentioning. Not many times do we have days that big where there's $10,000 or $10 million worth of closing in one day in our county.
It's huge.
Yeah, so it's great to see that, especially as we see dwindling numbers of transactions, that there's still some big transactions happening. Overall from the meeting, it was definitely nice to reshape my work plan for 2023. There were plenty of additions in there, and I honestly look forward to it. I just hope everybody in this room knows that if they have any questions that are reoccurring when it comes to wanting to see comparisons with stewardship versus acquisition over the years, and a lot of these reports I'm able to pull for all of you in any ways, I'm always more than happy to update you guys on what you want. I do sit quiet a lot during these meetings and let Lincoln kind of handle the direction that he wants to go and how much detail in these commission meetings, how deep he wants to go, because I know finance isn't very exciting to everybody. So, I think there's a few of us that would be more than happy to spend.
It's exciting to Mike.
Giving you
Plenty of time, but yeah, but not for everyone. So just know if anyone does ever have questions, please reach out to me. I'm more than happy to share any information and put anything into perspective from a finance perspective that any commission or any members of the public would like. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you, Aaron.
Yeah.
Aaron, good job. You put in a lot of work every meeting, every year. You're amazing. I really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Jacob, Doug, and Amanda.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jacob. I am a field assistant here on San Juan, and it's kind of crazy looking at all your faces, and I've been here almost 2 years, and I haven't met most of you in the flesh, so it's kind of nuts, but it's always so nice to see you all, even over the screen. But I just wanted to say thanks to everybody. I just feel so lucky to be part of this organization, and I really look forward to getting to be part of crafting these kind of vision, this strategy for moving forward, especially with the renewal, and just showing people what we get to do, because I get to be out there in the woods every day, and everyone we talk to loves it, but I know there are a lot of people we need to bring over to our side. So thanks you all for such a long day of hard work and talking through these tough subjects. So thanks.
Thanks, Jacob. Doug?
I think what I wanted to comment on was just a complimentary thing to the commission, the outgoing commission, existing and maybe incoming. And as I've been kind of trying to reach out and recruit people to be on the commission, that one of the things that I say just right off the bat is, you're the most functional group, like board commission that I've ever experienced. And that's been a commonality going back to, the 1990s when I kind of first had some interactions with the Land Bank Commission. So I'm not quite sure what has made that culture, but thank you for having that and carrying that forward, your dedication. I've really enjoyed working with all of you, and kind of the same goes for the staff. I mean, we have really outstanding staff and people working really hard in a lot of different areas, and I think it is pretty remarkable how much we pull off in so many different areas. So that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Doug. Amanda?
Hi. Uh, I guess I'll just say thanks to everyone on the commission today for all your work and discussion about some of these big topics. And then also all your work this year. You've tackled some big things. And so, you know, special thanks to Miles, Becker, and David and Jim for your years of service on the commission too. So thank you for putting in the time. You know, with a lot of the discussion today around renewal, and I know a lot of staff have been thinking about their work plans, and we probably have a lot of things that will tie into that too when we meet for our staff retreat early next year. So thank you all again, and look forward to next year.
Thank you, Amanda. I will do a very brief summary because I think I've summarized as we have gone along, but I'll just reiterate some things I've said before. And then Sandy, I'll leave you with the last word. So when Sandy got us started this morning, she said her goal for the day was for these discussions to lead to some decisions and set some direction. And my take on your conversation today is that you did exactly that. There's still some more work to be done to finalize some decisions, but this morning we extended an hour conversation into 2 hours to try and get some clarity around the strategic planning question, and I think you did. There was agreement at the end of that you want to do a strategic plan next year. There's still a question about what's the breadth of that, what's in and what's out of that, but Lincoln is going to bring you a outline that you can look at early in the year that will address that question, and will also bring forward any resource requirements to accomplish the strategic planning effort. So you all will have a chance to make a final decision about both what the scope is and what the cost and resources would be. So direction set, big decision, big body of work in 2023. You made a decision about not wanting to do an alternatives analysis in 2023. If you were to do that, you would do it after a vote if the vote in 2024 would be unsuccessful. But that starting in 2023, you should start to be prepared to answer the questions about what failure might mean for the organization, for the county, for the community, and that sort of FAQ notion that Mike Thomas introduced when he spoke. You made a decision that you do want to do some targeted work to reach out to neighbors. You want to do that through a survey, which Peter provided a good caution about how you frame that survey. Sandy provided another suggestion that maybe the survey is a little different for easement neighbors than property owned fee simple neighbors. And that you also want to have the stewards come to you along with a summary from Lincoln about lessons learned. I'm sorry, the stewards come to you and talk about what they're experiencing in their relationship with neighbors, what they're learning, what are best practices, what's working and not. And then also around that conversation, follow up on Jim's suggestion of let's look back at some lessons learned from some of the harder projects that we did. And then the very end of the day, there were some suggestions about staffing plan, title and salary review, increasing cost of stewardship. Those things, I think Krista and Lincoln agreed would get folded into a conversation in January, looking ahead at what upcoming agendas for the commission would be and when those things might be slotted in. So you established a lot of guidance today, made some decisions today. It wasn't always clean and simple and easy, but really good conversation. And personally, I want to add my thanks to Jim and Miles and David. I have thoroughly enjoyed working with you three and your commission colleagues, and I'm sorry to see you go, but new blood is important, and best wishes to each of you for whatever you decide to tackle next. Sandy?
Yes. Thank you, John. I think that was a great wrap up. And when you put it all in one conversation, it does seem like we accomplished exactly what we set out to do. And Krista will be the one to helm it into action. So I'm thrilled about that. I have.
Me too.
I have really enjoyed being chair. I don't know that there's an outgoing chair comment to be made, but this has been a real growing experience for me. And I've bumbled along in some cases, and everybody's been right there to help me know what to do. So I've appreciated it and look forward to continued participation next year.
He looks forward to not being chair. Let's just be honest about that. Yeah. So I would like to just say back to you, Sandy, seriously, like, people should manage their expectations for next year, because you have set the bar pretty high. I mean, very high. And it's just been, it's really been a pleasure to work with you and the whole commission, but you did a great job last year and this year. And hopefully I don't even have to rise to that occasion. It's just going to be a mellow strategic planning year, no problems. But anyway, I just want to extend my appreciation to what you accomplished in the past 2 years, and I will do my best to do as well.
Thank you, Krista. And also my thanks again to Jim. 14 years, wow, that's a long time. And great that you'll still be here as an advocate for the land bank and resource and all of that. So that's much appreciated. And David and Miles, yes, sorry to see you go, but thank you for being part of this. All right, now we're just, it's time to adjourn and wrap up. Last meeting. Lincoln gets to speak. Yes.
Let me just throw out a couple of things here. First of all, absolutely thank you guys for all your hard work. You know, you are volunteers and put in huge amounts of effort to this, and it's really important, and that's why you do it. So I don't know what else to say. Sandy, I don't know how to thank you enough, but you'll be around so we can continue to talk about stuff. Miles, wow, it's been great to have somebody who's really focused on ecological integrity. You know, that clear focus has really come through with you, and that's really been a great thing to have. And David, who I think everyone probably agrees is like Mr. Pragmatism, just cut through issues, getting to the heart of it, really appreciated that. And I'm sure the folks who have renewal on their mind have your number, so don't change it. Jim, the antithesis of pragmatism sometimes, but it is passion. You said it yourself. And we've really appreciated having you and you know, having you as a friend.
Nice.
That's
Thank
it.
you,
And
Lincoln.
thanks. Incredible stuff. Always.
Right. Everybody have a great holiday, and we'll see most of you next year. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
everyone.
Thank
Yeah.
you all.
Thank you,
Good night.
John. Great meeting.
Happy holidays.